You see Tory as you come in the door, and him and Ed as they greet people, and sometimes you think, well, man, a guy like Tory, he's been in church all of his life, and he's always loved Jesus, and he, ever since birth he's been a Christian, which, by the way, is nowhere in the Bible, but some people buy that one. And so I want to just, first of all, because he is our sports ministry director, he, along with Greg and Steve and myself and Jason, when he was here, are a part of that ministry. Tell me, little Tory growing up, what church roots, Jesus, where did it all happen? Where did everything start out and things along that line?
Well, I know one of the first things you asked me was kind of go over my young experience before I met Christ. And my very first memory I have as a kid was between the ages of 2 and 3. I don't recall exactly where, but those of you guys that have ever driven through Martinsburg, Missouri, there's two silos on the side of 19, and there's some houses that live back there, and that's where I was living at the time. And I don't recall anything before, and I don't recall much that follows for the years that follow. But I remember my mom and my sister and I she's about a year younger than me. We both running around our whitey-tidies in the summer, nothing else on. And I remember she leaving and locking the door and say she'd be back, and she just never came back. Never. I was 8 before I met my mom again. I don't know what happened the rest of that day. I remember that minute, that moment. I remember the trusting, because you always trust your parents are going to do what they say they're going to do, that she'll be back, but she just didn't. And I don't know what time my dad came home. I don't remember all of it that happened after that, but I know that knowing my mom's situation, she's been in multiple relationships, and I have 4 half or full sisters, and I have 2 adopted sisters, and my mom has left all of them at one time or another too, at different times of their life, regardless of whoever she's with. But I know that my dad, who at the time was not saved, worked with heating and air, Schreier Heating and Air Conditioning in Montgomery and in that general area. And I know that he was trying to raise us, and we had issues with FSD and DFS because a single dad trying to raise 2 kids. We could barely afford to eat majority of the time, my sister and I. I know that I spent a good portion of pretty much 8 to 10 hours a day, either with my Aunt Liz, who's an awesome lady who is now saved, that pretty much raised us, or my grandma. And grandma's one of the most influential people in my life because you guys ever had that grandma? She's kind of short, kind of mean, kind of rude, always kind of in your face, but she loves the Lord. That's my grandma. She's always either yelling at you or sharing the gospel to you. There's really no in between. And she talks a lot, as do I and my dad, so we get it honestly. But she was married to an alcoholic who was my grandpa. My grandpa, when I was young, was the person I looked up to the most. And I didn't realize that he was an alcoholic, for the longest time, because he'd always wait until I left, or he'd drink when I wasn't around, because I was with him and Grandma majority of the day, because my dad couldn't afford babysitting. And I remember, because we stayed with him majority of the day, and I remember one day, Dad got called to work at night, which is something that typically doesn't happen. And so Dad had to bring us back to Grandma and Grandpa's house. Well, Grandpa had been drinking at that time, and the guy who to this day, the guy I respect the most to me is my dad, but at that point it was my grandpa. And I remember that day, I came back in, and my dad dropped us off, and my grandpa, was kind of not normal. And he started yelling and kind of cussing, and that's just not him. That's not what he typically does. And I remember him grabbing me by my hair, dragging me down the hallway, and trying to light me on fire in the bedroom. I don't remember how I got out. I imagine it's my grandma, because my grandma, I told you she's kind of mean, a little rough. And I imagine she got in there and she called my dad. I remember my dad showing up, and I remember my dad's not a person of little words. My dad talks all the time. My dad didn't say a word. And I remember my dad grabbed us. I don't even know where my sister was because it was just me there that day. Grabbed me and pulled me and left. And from that point on, I know we went to a babysitter, and I don't know if that's the reason that all that happened. I don't recall. But that traumatic experience, at that age I already determined to myself as I grew up I was never going to drink. It didn't matter what happened. Once I realized what my dad shared with me, what was going to happen, and it doesn't matter if I was 5 or 6, I had determined at that age, because I'm a little strong-willed, that this will never happen in my life. It will not be a part of my life. And so still this day, I've had a couple of drinks, but I just don't. But that day was the last day my grandpa ever drank. My grandpa got saved a year later because of that experience, and came to the Lord a couple years. He died a couple years later. But it's just, God works in just crazy ways. And I've envisioned in my head 100,000 times my grandma, after I left, beat my grandpa up over the experience because that's the type of person that she is. But I mean, he never drank after that, and so my grandpa passed away a couple years later. But he was at that age my favorite person to be around. But like I said, my grandma was a Christian. She was always, when we stayed with her, we had to go to church. She always sat in the same spot in the same pew by herself, nobody else around, and she coughed and hacked all the time because she smoked a lot. And I always remember kind of being embarrassed, going to church sitting next to my grandma. But my grandma was awesome. And my dad, a couple years later. This is between the age of 3 and 5, 3 and 6, met a person who I call Mom now. She had met him at a concert because he used to play in bands and drive around. That's what he did during his free time. And her parents are awesome Christians. And they encouraged him along with Grandma to get back into church, and she encouraged him too. And, so the worst experience that most people would have, which was my mom leaving when I was young, led to my dad meeting this awesome lady and Christ being a part of my life from that moment on. So from between 5 and 6, somewhere in that range when she came in, they've been pushing the Lord down our throats pretty much since. And so had a great time from there. It was when I was 8, my mom came back into our lives, and she determined that she was going to try to get full custody of us. At that point, I remember my mom with one image, but I can't remember anything else. I don't remember. I've never seen her since. And I remember going through a rough time because it was a 6-month court process, and Dad was afraid she was going to get custody and the different things. And I remember at that point in my life, another commitment. I will never not be a part of my kids' lives. No matter what happens, I will always take less money to be available to be a part of my kids' lives because of what my mom put me through. Not so much the times not being there, but when she came back and the emotions that I was going through. When my fear was I was going to leave my dad and go live with this person who I didn't know, and God took care of that. That didn't happen. She wasn't stable. She didn't make good decisions, and that all played out through court. And my mom, who I call Mom now, she later adopted us and got full custody of us. So, like, even to my kids now, Shay doesn't understand that her grandma is not my mom. I have not shared that with her yet. I don't know that she's capable to understand. At some point, she's going to figure it out because my mom is on Facebook. She does write posts and stuff to me, and she's going to, Dad, who's that? Because she always says, I love you, son. I love you, son. And when she does, hey, that's Debbie. Let me tell you the story about, Debbie. And, I have other sisters, and most of my sisters live in Wellsville, and she's done the same thing to them at different points. She chose different men and kicked them out of the house because the men didn't want them around at ages 12 and 13. So she did the same thing to them as they got older. But my grandma and my mom and my dad, we started going to church pretty regularly. That was something that we were always involved in. And I remember one Sunday in church, this was a year after going through all this experience, the pastor was preaching if you're not saved, when you die, you're going to go to hell. And he kind of shared that, and I was scared at that moment. I didn't understand everything that was going on, but I knew that I didn't want to do that. And so they gave the last music where they're singing at the end. I had seen people come down before, down the aisles, and so I just walked down. Well, they weren't doing that. I didn't know, but I went and sat in the front pew and was waiting for the pastor because I've seen him do that before, and my dad kind of looked at me kind of funny, and my mom did too. And pastor, after the service was over, came down, and he's like, what's up? And I'm like, I don't want to go to hell. I don't understand it all, but I don't want to go to hell. And so he's like, well, why don't you meet with me? We'll discuss it. And, he kind of shared the dirty coffee cup filled with coffee, how that's what your life is with all the different things. And if you empty it out and fill it up with, Christ, this is what it looks like, and you're pure. And I'm like, well, I'll take that. That's better than what I had before. And from that moment, God has been pretty much a part of my life pretty much since. So
Amen.
That was 9 and 2 weeks before Easter. I don't remember the date. So.
Okay. We'll take it, yeah. And by the way, what Tory's talking about, the fact that you grew up in church or in this church or any church, and if you're banking on, I've been in church and I was baptized when I was a kid and all that stuff. If you're banking on that to get you to heaven, that's not what saves you. Okay, it's a relationship with Jesus Christ because of what Christ did. You've got this burden for youth and sports ministry. Where do you see? How did God put that in you? Where did that start, and how did that come together?
I went to Hannibal LaGrange Christian school down the road. And one year during summer, they were doing these things called camp teams where you travel for the summer and you go to different places and from week to week and you talk, you share about Christ to different teenagers. And I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to commit my summer to doing that. And a couple of my buddies did it, and 2 or 3 weeks later, it was still available. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just put my name in the hat because I know there's other people that want it. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. I really don't want it, But if it happens, it happens. And they were going to pay me, so it was, I had to work. And that happened, and they said, hey, you're on the team. And at that point, I was like, what did I get myself into? I don't really know what I'm doing. And so we started going to the camps, and I started realizing really quick that I just have a personality that kind of draws that age to me, a little bit. And that first week that we went to the camp, pastor didn't show up, and they're like, well, you guys are the team. You guys have to give the sermon every week or every night. And they all looked at me. And I'm like, I've never preached. I mean, at youth week, we get up and give a 5-minute sermon from time to time. But I'm like, I've never done that. And they're like, well, we nominate you, and we'll pray for you. So this is what you're going to do. And so I really quickly came up with 3 or 4 resourceful tools that, just because I'm a very visual person, the golf balls and the Trinity. And I just came up with different things that I thought, that I remembered at camps that worked for me. And I used the same repertoire all summer long because the next camp we went to, they didn't have a pastor. Next camp we went to, they didn't have a pastor. There's only one camp we went to in 12 weeks where they had a pastor. And I ended up being just given that opportunity. And it was a great experience. And, when I graduated with a degree in human services, I had kind of already predetermined that I wanted to work with youth at like a lockdown facility because that's where my dad worked, and I had spent some time there. And so I got the job right off the bat. And I don't know if you guys know what I did before, but in my last job, and I did this for almost a decade, I worked with juveniles who committed adult crimes, rape, murder, child molestation, pretty extreme things that were tried as an adult. So most of them had 15 to 30-year sentences, but they were under the age of 17 when they did it. And so the state took these kids after interviews and said, we will give them both. We'll give them an adult certification and a juvenile certification. And so if they come to our program and do well for 4 or 5 years straight without ever leaving and getting their high school diploma and doing therapy every night and addressing all their issues, then at the end of that time, I go to court with them. I testify that they should go out, that they should be free, and then they get out on probation. And if they do well on probation, they don't have to serve the 30-year sentence. They just have to serve the 5 or 6 years that they served with us. But it became real apparent really quick in that job that when crisis situations happened, I always seemed to jump in and it stopped. Don't know why. That is all about God. That has nothing about me. I don't take any credit for that. But kids would be fighting. I'd jump in. I wouldn't get hit. Kids would be, throwing chairs at each other. I would jump in. I didn't get a chair thrown at me. And so God has always taken care of me. I remember later on, I got in a situation when I took a job at Hillsborough as a facility manager, and we had a big riot. We had a bunch of kids fighting. And I had one buddy. He was about 300 pounds, about 6'5", he's the biggest kid I've ever had in the program. And he had been knocking out all the kids, been punching every kid that mouthed him, he hit him. And he was knocking them out. And so I'm like, if you want to go home, what I need from you is to not be violent and to work with me on issues on how we deal with your anger, stopping it at a point and not getting it to that point. And we had made progress. We've been doing really well. And I remember one day, he and I had taken a walk because he had been frustrated. He wanted to talk to Mr. T. And so I come in, and he's like, I just wanted to share with you what happened to me and why I'm proud of myself. This kid did this and spit at me, and I didn't punch him. And I'm so happy. He's like, if he was on the outside right now, I'd punch him. He's like, but I'm not right here, and I'm just proud of myself. And so we walk, and I'm praising him up and down, and we walked back down to the group, and one of the kids from the other group had jumped on one of his buddies and started beating him up. And he jumps in, he pulls the kid off, he throws him back, and he gets on the other kid and starts protecting his buddy, just getting hit over and over again by this other kid. And these other kids are trying to come out and help, and some of the kids have got involved at that point. And he got hit 10, 15 times as I'm pulling these other kids off. And finally, he just turned around at me, and he looked, and he's like, I'm sorry, Mr. T. Pop. And he hit the kid, and he laid him out. Well, I'm like, buddy, I've got to restrain you. You know the rules. If you do this, you're going to get restrained. He's like, you try it. And I'm like, I warned you. And I jumped on his back, and I start choking him, going down the hallway. And he's wall to wall to wall to wall to wall. And the next day I had a bruise about that big across my whole back where he ran me into a water fountain. But he hits the ground, and he kind of comes out, and I'm like, I'm not letting you go. And he's heavy, by the way. I'm like, I am not letting you go until you quit. I will not hurt you. I will not harm you. I promise you that. But I will not let you go until you're done. We got all the kids out, and we sent all the rest of them back to the cottage, and we locked down the cottages. And I said, come with me. And he got up after everybody was gone, and we walked to the cottage where we have these isolation rooms. It's a big metal room. It's just one kid can be in there at a time. And I looked at him. I'm like, you know, you swung at another staff, not me. I said, you've got to go in there. He's like, I ain't going in there. I'm like, I already put you down once. I said, we're going in whether you want to go in or not. And I said, I will not hurt you, but I will get you in that room. And he looked at me. He's like, I tell you what, Mr. T, if you go in there with me, I'll go in there. I'm like, all right. And so I tell my staff, and I just hired this lady. I'm like, open the doors because it's on a buzzer. Let us in. And you just stay near because if he gets in there and I'm in a little room and he decides to flip out, I don't have handcuffs on him or anything. Where am I going to go? So we get him in this isolation room and the staff leaves. Well, the staff doesn't come back. It's 4 hours later before the next group of staff come on. So I'm in this room. This kid's bawling in my head in my lap, just crying. I love you. I'm sorry. I'd never hurt you. I just don't want to disappoint my mom. But I mean, this kid was knocking out staff and hitting people all up and down the thing. Never once tried to hit me. Never once tried to hit me. And he ended up getting shipped to another facility because he actually punched my boss's boss's boss. And that doesn't go very well. And so I can't even tell you today where he's at because I can't have any contact with him once he leaves. But and so in different situations that we have, as people start getting aggressive and violent, I don't know. God just has this thing where he says, this is about to happen. You need to jump in and do this. That does not mean I won't get hit. That doesn't mean I won't hit back, But I've been blessed with that just not being the case.
Amen. Well, I just believe, and the reason I had Tory share that is because you may, like I said, you come into church and you think that, man, all these people, they've always had their life, a certain way. And I feel like that's all over the place. That's all of us. That if we were to really share what's behind the curtain. But I love the fact that Tory doesn't use this as an excuse. I could go around the room of different people that have now wanted to use or have a heart for these young people. And I've never heard him say, and by the way, you're a jerk and I can't believe how stupid you are, because if you knew where I came from, he doesn't do that. He just loves these kids, prays for them. And so what's your heartbeat? What do you see, how do you see God wiring you for now and beyond when it comes to ministry?
My job has taken me a slightly different direction in the most recent years. The last job I had, I was working 60, 70 hours a week, and I was making twice what I'm making now, but it pulled me away from my kids. And like I said, I had made a commitment that my family will always, come before my job and before things that I do. I know it's my responsibility to provide for my family, and I will do that, but I will not take a job that doesn't allow me to spend time with my family. Right now, I'm really wired to kids. I'm wired to kids, working with young kids. I really enjoy that. That's part, though. I have another part where I enjoy being physically active and involved in anything. It doesn't matter whether it's softball, exercise, weightlifting, basketball, football. But right now, to me, my ministry is here because my family is here. If I were to choose a ministry that took me abroad or did something different away from here, my family can't be a part of that. And I have to have my family. That's so important to me. And so Warrenton right now, in my job, I service the low income and the needy families that are here in Warrenton. That's what I do. Those are the families that my job has put me to have an impact on, and they have an impact on my life too. And with the guys here, there's a lot of guys here we talk about all the time. There are guys that respond to Mark that don't respond to me. There are guys that everybody looks like, oh no, I like those guys. There are guys that look at both of us, love Steve. They look at us and like, but that, it's all about
everybody
Steve.
Likes Greg.
And Greg's just...
He's a rock star, so we don't... So, but I thank the Lord for Tory and his willingness to step in, and so thank you for sharing today. I appreciate it. Steve, would you come and read, please? Yeah, I got it, man. Thank you.
Our scripture reading today is found in the book of Acts, chapter 26. We'll begin reading at verse 12 through verse 18. If you're using the Pew Bible, it is found on page 935. Again, the book of Acts, chapter 26, beginning at verse 12. On one of these journeys, I was going to Damascus with the authority and commissions of the chief priest. About noon, O king, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Then I asked, Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now get up and stand on your feet. I've appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen of me and what I will show you. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me.
Thank you. In the few moments that we have left, I wanted to continue on with our working through Acts here. So as Steve read that scripture to you, and as we are working through these few verses, I want to highlight, getting back to the idea of the power of testimony. The title of today's message, and there's a section in your bulletin to fill in some blanks and to write some notes, is Comes In Like a Lion. And those of you that understand that phrase, there's a phrase that talks about March, the month of March, and that if it comes in like a lion, it will go out like a lamb. If it comes in like a lamb, it goes out like a lion. And what the phrase is trying to teach or share is the fact that if there is bad weather at the beginning of March, by the end of March, it should be good, and vice versa. And what's interesting, as a kid, I remember hearing that phrase and kind of locking that in, always hoping that it came in like a lion. That was always my hope, that we would have going into April, because I love the warm weather. And it's kind of one of those things that if you ever picked up, and I got this, the Old Farmer's Almanac. And so I'd like to read you what the Old Farmer's Almanac says about what's coming up weather-wise. So that, because a lot of times, you watch the weather and it's like, yeah, whatever. But like today, it says there's going to be sprinkles. Tomorrow, there'll be flinkles, which I guess are flurries and sprinkles. All right? Then the next day it'll be cold, and something it says here, it says, the appearance of sap buckets hanging on maple trees is as sure a sign of spring as spotting the first robin. Tapping season usually begins in late February and lasts well into March, ending as the leaf buds begin to enlarge. But weather dictates when the sap will actually start to flow. It runs best when nighttime temperatures fall into the 20s and daytime highs are well above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. As a boy, I often helped my neighbor John tap the old maple trees that lined our road. First, he drilled a 7/16-inch hole into a tree trunk 3 feet above the ground. Next, he would use a hammer to drive an iron tap, a hollow tube, also called a spile, into the hole, after which I would hang a bucket on it. I still remember the ping, ping, ping as the first drops of sap hit the bottom of the metal pail. And so he goes through this description of what would go on with just putting something so simple as that together. And I think to myself sometimes that old time, even as Tory was talking about his grandma, and we all, as we're hearing it and as he's painting that picture, we could envision this person that as he's explaining, this angry person, but this person that shared the gospel with me. And yet, as Tory's talking about it, you're endeared to a person that if you and I saw them and they were acting that way, we were like, they would anger us. But because we know Tory and because we trust that what he's saying is true, that I guess there's something lovable about her. There's a power in testimony. And so as we have opportunity to do these interviews, I remember the different times where people have stepped up here and have shared their testimony, to hear somebody's story and the experience and how Jesus came into their life and how he changed their life. How that grabs the attention. Now, it can't just be a story that I'm a pretty good guy and this is the way I am. There has to be, every testimony has this. There's BC, which is what my life was like before Christ. And then there is the time when I come face to face with an understanding that I need this person to change my life. And then afterwards, what happened? Some people, they only stay on that. They either have this thing, which there's no testimony there, or they have this time where they meet him, but nothing changes. Then I got to wonder, did you really meet him? Because he changes your life. Let's work through this together as we work through these few verses. Point number one. The revelation is unexpected. The revelation is unexpected. Look at verse 12 again. In this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. He did this to arrest any Christian he might find there. Remember, he's trying to get across to Agrippa, hey, just so you know, as I share this testimony, these people that are actually going against me and they want to prosecute me in the courtroom of your courtroom and the other 4 trials that we've had, I just want you to know I was just like them. I was just like them before Jesus Christ. And so this revelation, it's unexpected. Point number 2, the revelation is unmistakable. The revelation is unmistakable. Suddenly, look at verse 13. At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. This is even brighter than any Middle Eastern sun. If you've ever had opportunity to be in the Middle East, it's bright already. This is even brighter. Jesus Christ. We know it's Jesus Christ because look, verse 14. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, I love how God shows up and speaks to us in something that we can understand. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. The Lord Jesus Christ, the risen one, clarifies who is fighting or who Saul is fighting. And he pictures him like an ox, isn't that nice of God? But it's how he pictured him, fighting the goads. And what the goads was behind the yoke of the oxen, this young ox that's being disobedient, that doesn't want to go where the direction that the farmer wants him to go, is placed. And so out of anger, that ox would kick back because it didn't want to plow. There would be a wooden bar there, and out of it, facing the calves or the back of the leg of the ox, the sharp wooden, almost spear-like points. And so as he's kicking, an ox would realize, this isn't really smart. I should not keep doing that. And yet, there had to be a part, as Paul is doing what he's doing, every now and then some of the scriptures that he would hear about these people called Christians would come to his memory, because he was an amazing mind, this rabbi that was just coming of age and learning all of these things. And they would use these Old Testament passages about this person that he hated, and they would put those two together and say, oh, by the way, this Christ, which, by the way, always, if you want to do this, it helps me understand. Christ is a title, and it is Greek for Messiah. So the Jewish mind, when they would hear that, they would hear Jesus the Messiah every time that was being said, which would bother them if they don't have any interest in coming to know Jesus the Messiah. And so he's kicking against these spikes. And God at some point says, that's it, I'm getting a hold of you. That's it, I'm going to change. Grandpa of Tory, you've gone too far now. You've been kicking against the goads. Point number 3. It's just not just this revelation that's sitting out there. The revelation is a person. Jesus has to come up in our testimony. It can't just be God. It has to be the person of Jesus Christ. Verse 15. And I said, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." He thought he was persecuting a group of people. Jesus associates himself with us. He says, if you are part of my body called the church, when they persecute you, they are persecuting me. He's stunned, he's blinded, he's terrified. Saul of Tarsus, number one persecutor of Christians, asked the Lord a question. And that answer must have floored him. It must have shaken him up. This is the one that Saul hated and despised. This is the leader of all the problems that he had. Or at least he thought so. Point number 4. The revelation has a plan. Look at verse 16. But rise. I love this, how God is saving somebody for a purpose. It's not just saving so that now you got this nice little sanctified person. It's, I'm saving you because I want to use you. I want to send you somewhere. I want to send you to somebody. Verse 16. But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. God has plans for Saul, and he knows what he's going to experience. Verse 17. Delivering you, remember we talked about this last week, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles, not so that I could be in a cloister or some sort of monastery, or I'm just going to separate myself from them. I don't want to be in the world anymore. I hear Christians talking like this. I can't believe they'll have people at their work. This person has bad language. I just can't believe it. Things are getting so bad. And I always hear them just ripping on these people that, no offense, they're supposed to be that way. They don't know God. And if I could just get away from them. I just want to get away from them. And God's saying, no, I saved you out of that to put you back into that. To just flat out, I want you to grow. That's why when Tory was talking about those people, and he was talking about the fact that some people look at them and they'll see them come in, and these guys are kind of rough and they're kind of hard and they act a certain way, and on the court they'll swear and they'll do these things, and to me they're people that God loves, that Jesus died for. And God doesn't want us to go, oh, and I can't be around those people. There's certain people that certain people are attracted to, but at some point, if we're honest, God calls us out of our little safety net. And okay, even as Kurt was sharing his testimony today, and God, I really believe it, God just impacted him and said, I want you to have a ministry with deaf people. What, me? What deaf? Yeah, you. But I don't even, God doesn't take excuses, because he's the one who created the mouth. And pushes you back in. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. You're going to do it. I'll show up, I promise. And this is Paul's commissioning as an apostle, one that is sent. Verse 18. To open their eyes. Isn't this beautiful? God calls us to this. To open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan. That's why they do what they do. It's a spirit. We wrestle not with flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. The power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. The gospel will open eyes. The Bible teaches that unbelievers live in spiritual darkness. Look at Ephesians 4:18 and 19. Ephesians 4:18 and 19. They are darkened in their understanding. That's why that guy is the way he is at work. But I don't want to be around him. He just drives me nuts. God, give me eyes to see. He's darkened in his understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. That's why. The Bible frequently uses light as a metaphor for salvation. The blessed result of salvation is forgiveness of sins. Faith in Christ is what saves. You know, I'm working on this thesis as I can finish up my education. finish up my education. That's a joke. Working toward a degree, and it's a sports ministry thesis. And I was reading this book called ESPN The Company, The Story and Lessons Behind the Most Fanatical Brand in Sports. I thought this section of this chapter just grabbed me. He says, as I stated in the introduction, legend is that ESPN only hires people who are sports fanatics and has done so since the beginning. The story goes that Scotty Canal, Chet Simmons' first-hand right-hand man, was emphatic about it when he interviewed prospective employees. His most important question to a job candidate was, now I want you to think about this for a second. I'd like you to think about God's calling on your life and mine. So I'd like you to transfer this in your brain. Because some of you are like, I'm not into sports. Some of you are. Some of you aren't. Some are you into your grandkids. Some of you are into music. Some of you, so whatever that is, if you could imagine this person interviewing you for a job. And God is pulling you and I aside, and He's saying, I got a job for you, but I want to find out where your heart is. I want to have an understanding of where your heart is. And so whatever you might transfer sports, I'd like you to put things of the Lord in that blank. So his most important question to a job candidate was, what part of the newspaper do you turn to first every morning? Answer anything but the sports section. The interview was effectively over. Give the right answer, and Canal dug in more deeply. What's your favorite team? Give me some stats. What's the most painful sports moment of your life? What's the best memory? Name some bench players on your championship team. Unless you knew sports at the most detailed level, you are not really a fanatic, and you didn't belong at ESPN. I started thinking about that because being a person that loves sports, I could instantly answer those questions. It wasn't even hard. Now, some of you, if you're not into sports, you'd be like, I'm not into that. So it'd be hard. But if I asked you, what's your most painful experience with your family? What's your most painful experience when it came to the recitals that you've done? What's your favorite artist? What's your favorite song? Give me a list of your 10, and I could just keep going on. Whatever your thing is. I thought about that with God. We're all in training. We're all, I would hope, as Christians, desiring to grow deeper in things of the Lord. Do you have a testimony? I mean, if I were to sit across from you here and start sharing and asking the same kind of questions, maybe in a different way than I did with Tory, would you have an answer? I know Tory didn't seem to struggle to talk. That's how he's wired. But if I spent a certain amount of time with you and I started to get to know, I could ask questions and pull stuff out of you on something that you're passionate about. It's easy. It's not a problem for me at all. But when it comes to things of the Lord, do you know Him? Was there a day, and you can remember back, there was a day that I came face to face with my need to receive Jesus Christ as my Savior and Lord. And then since then, what's your most painful experience that you've had when it comes to these things? Who are the people that you look up to when it comes to spiritual things? Because I'm thinking of your favorite team and the people that you look up to. Because Tory, as he's sharing the testimony, yes, Jesus Christ came and changed his life, but there were people that were instrumental in pouring into his life. Do you have anything like that? Testimony is biblical. Spiritual experience is biblical. Do you have a story? And if you don't, why don't you start today so that you'd have a story? And then you can share, if you're ever called, in the courtroom of life. And then you'd have a way to point people to Jesus Christ. Let's pray.